September, we are doing something as a church that we always do this time of year, which is we are talking about some things that are very important to us, that maybe have been in the past, or are things that will always be important to us, or in some cases, things that are important to us going forward as a church family. First 2 weeks, we talked about how the Christians that are our forefathers in the faith saw themselves as a family that was larger than biology. That we can, in a very real way, be each other's brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, even though we are not physically related to one another. Last week, we heard directly from people who were previously unchurched or are not Christians. And churches don't really get a choice about whether or not they take it upon themselves to reach people like that as their mission. It's what all of us should be about. I hope last week was very instructive in that regard. So this week, we're going to add another piece to what we're calling the short list for 2014 and 2015. And to do that, let me start by talking to you about one of the distinctives of our ancestors in the faith, the first Christians. If you go back and you read, not necessarily what the Bible has to say, but what Roman and other historians were saying about Christianity, what I'm about to talk about will come through in spades. To start, you need to know something about caring for the poor in the ancient world. This is 2,000 years ago in the time of Jesus and the first Christians. Many Roman and Greek leaders and philosophers and teachers viewed charity, they viewed caring for the poor and the needy as a pathological defect, meaning it was a virus. And societies and people should pay attention to not giving in to that virus. In fact, people as famous as Plato would have you believe that the best thing you can do for a poor person or a needy person who was unable to take care of their own personal well-being is just to let them die. This is the world into which Christianity was born by Jesus. There's a special set of needy or impoverished people in the New Testament world called widows and orphans. That painting up on the screen is by a German artist from 100 years ago, and it is simply entitled Widows and Orphans. Those same civic and philosophical leaders in the Roman and Greek world would tell you that here is the most that any good moral person in Roman or Greek society should do for a widow or an orphan. If they are related to you by blood, then maybe you should bring them into your home and care for them yourself, adding them to your family. But really, realistically, only the very affluent in Jesus' day could do that, and 95% of the world was not affluent. So realistically, what would go on is that widows and orphans, and there were many widows and orphans, because of the many wars, because of the lack of proper medical care, because of famine. These widows and orphans would often be sold into slavery. And they would spend the rest of their life simply because they lost their spouse or their parents in slavery, or they'd die on the street. This was the world into which Christianity was born. Now here's the contrast. This is an ancient Roman humorist and philosopher named Lucian, speaking about the first Christians. And he writes of our forefathers in the faith, "The earnestness with which the people of this religion help one another in their needs is incredible. They spare themselves no expense to go to that end. Their first lawgiver," by which he means Jesus, "their first lawgiver put it into their hearts and heads that somehow they were all brothers and sisters. This is what the ancient Roman world thought of our forefathers in the faith. That we were divergent from, distinct from the way that the culture of the time thought about caring for the vulnerable and the needy. Of course, if you're familiar with the Bible at all, especially the writings of the first Christians in the New Testament, then you are aware of verses like this. Written by Jesus' half-brother, this has the distinction of being the first letter written in your New Testament, sometime around the mid-40s AD. In that second verse, verse 27 of James chapter 1, James says very clearly, let me tell you what good religion looks like. Pure and undefiled religion. It looks like two things. You know what one of them is? Taking care of widows and orphans. And there are no qualifications in that verse. Not the ones related to you. Not the ones that are your family by extension or by biology. No. You take care of all orphans and widows. This is what spirituality, this is what Christianity lived out well looks like, according to James. Well, as you've heard me say a couple of times in the last 6 months, one of the things that we have noticed about ourselves as a church, as we've gone on this love your neighbor adventure together, is that we have a particular gift, we have a particular skill or aptitude at caring for what I would characterize a new kind of widow and orphan. A group of people that in our culture often have to deal with financial and emotional and interpersonal vulnerability and need. And time and again, even if your eyes have not caught it, our church has reached out to and been a home to this group of people. What group of people? We're talking about single moms. We're talking about divorced women. We're talking about abused women. These are the widows and orphans that you have been really good at caring for. So we want to spend a morning learning more about that and hearing from them directly instead of hearing about them from me, as we begin to continue to take steps forward into caring for people like that more and more and more. So, this morning, like last week, you're going to get to hear from 3 women that you have cared for and reached who fit that category. And I thank them in advance for the courage that it takes to do this. So ladies, first, why don't you do us the favor of telling the audience today why it is that I asked you to be on this panel. Give us the thumbnail sketch of that part of your personal journey or story. Would you do that for me? I know, Courtney, you're going to start, right?
Yeah. I'm Courtney Dokter, and I started attending RiverTree about 8 or 9 years ago when we were actually transitioning from the homeschool building the first time into the new building. And I was attending RiverTree as a single person at that time because my now ex-husband had just walked away from the church and from his Christian faith. And his dad was the lead pastor at the church that I had attended my whole childhood. And both of our families attended. And given those circumstances, I didn't feel like I could continue to attend that church alone, just because of the way that would impact our families who were both still there. And so I began church shopping and came to RiverTree. During that time, my ex continued to struggle with his faith and just came across a whole lot of other life struggles that I feel like are his story to share and not mine, but they caused us to separate for a very lengthy period of time and attend individual and couples counseling to try to figure out where to go. And after a lot of counseling, we kind of came to the conclusion that given our newfound differences in faith and our future plans being so different, that it would be best if we went our separate ways. And so we divorced. And that is kind of how I came to RiverTree initially very broken and bitter and just struggling about where life was supposed to go next for me.
Thank you, Courtney. Denise?
Is it on?
Mhm.
Okay. Can't tell. I came to RiverTree in the summer of 2008. A friend brought me here. A week or so before that, I had asked my husband to leave our home. My story starts more back. We started dating, and I was a junior in high school. It was the summer before my junior year in 1987, and he had just graduated high school, and we were together all those years and got married in 94. Had 2 boys in 2001 and 3, and then a day in 2008 when the boys were 7 and 4, I had discovered that my ex had a secret life, and it just wasn't safe for him to be around me and the kids anymore. And he left, and it was never spoken about again. And the week after that, a friend of mine brought me to RiverTree, and I've been here ever since, and finally reached out to Pastor Chris, and he helped me deal with struggling with the belief of not wanting to be divorced. And for about 18 months after my ex left, I was in complete numbness. I didn't feel like I could feel anything. I still have bits and pieces of that, but being here at RiverTree and my faith growing, that has mostly disappeared.
Thank you, Denise. Erica?
My name is Erica Bacon, and I've been here for about 5 years. And I also was invited by a friend to come to RiverTree. I came here about 3 months after I left my husband of 10 years, who was abusive. And we were heavily involved in church ministry. He was a leader at our previous church. And it was just really hard for me to trust people in church after what we went through with me leaving. And I just felt like church wasn't a safe place, but I needed to continue to grow spiritually. So I kind of came to RiverTree hoping to come to the service and leave and not really get to know anybody, but at least come. That obviously didn't happen because I'm here right now, and I have a lot of amazing friends. But it just, RiverTree made me feel at home and welcomed, even though I was struggling through the worst part of my life and what a lot of people would consider me a sinner. They accepted me, broken pieces and all.
Thank you. Need to have your ears on, right? What do you hear that's in common in those 3 stories? You guys were a safe place. You were a gracious place. You invited them to be a part of our family. You were gracious to them. They were all struggling with the stigma that they felt from what they'd been through. And they'd even had other Christians perhaps look down on them. You need to hear that loud and clear. This is what it's like to reach out to and care for women like Courtney, Denise, and Erica. Also, by the way, they're all 3 married now, but I don't think we can make that promise to every single woman that we reach out to.
We didn't meet them here. There's not enough single guys here.
There you go. Exactly.
Don't come here for that.
Well, you've done a good job in answering the first question, but I think I want you to go a step or 2 further. And why don't you, from your experience, let us in on some of the common misperceptions that people who haven't been through what you've been through have about women like you and folks who have gone through what you have. just open the window a little bit for us and let us in on that. Maybe tell us things that you wish people would know or wish they did know that they didn't. Courtney, you want to start?
I think one common misconception that people have in situations, at least like mine, are that they either need to help you fix it or they need to give you unsolicited advice. And a lot of times that advice from different people doesn't always match. And so what one person is telling you should do, it doesn't match what someone else is telling you should do. And so I feel like for me, I had to really step back and just figure out what would be best for me at that time and what God was leading me to do. And that was really difficult. I think also, you know, like Pastor Chris said, there's a whole lot of stigma in the Christian faith around divorce. And I think I felt very judged. A lot of my close Christian friends, I felt like they had to give me ways to fix it and do more. And a lot of them distanced themselves from me at that time, which was really hurtful because it was when I needed him the most. And I felt very alone during that time in my life. And I think I wish that people would have known that what I really needed was someone to listen and someone to cry with me and someone to tell me that they were sorry, that life really didn't turn out the way I had expected it to. And I think for me, just the loss of friendship and dealing with the hurt of that was the hardest thing that I had to go through alone.
Thank you, Courtney. You can hear the pain of that, right? This is real. Denise?
I had the same experiences as Courtney, too. A little different because I had 2 young children, so I did have people telling me what to do. One of my most shocking moments was I was outside my home, and I had become friends with a pastor's wife who had walked her children around, and my kids I was out front watering, and she said, "Oh, where's the boys?" And I said, "Well, unfortunately, my husband and I separated, and they're with him right now." And we had started becoming friends and making plans to have coffee. And after that, her husband and herself, they wouldn't walk on my side of the street. And it made me feel very ashamed and sad. And then after being at RiverTree for several years, I didn't feel that way about them. I felt very sad for them and thought, oh, thank goodness I didn't end up at that church. But even things like that, there was misconceptions that with other maybe neighborhood people that I was like after their husband all of a sudden. Or people wanting to right away set you up to date. And for me, I had never learned to be an adult by myself because I had started dating my ex at 16. I really needed more time to figure out who I was and what I liked, and to just focus on taking care of my kids and healing. I didn't realize until after my ex left that I had been under such strain and stress of verbal abuse, and there was always that high level of perfection that I had to achieve, and which I never could. So it really feeded my anxiety and my social anxiety. 5-6 years ago, I could have never been up here speaking. The other misconception is that people saw us not as a family. That's the divorced mom, that's the kids. Statistic-wise, the kids aren't going to excel in school, they're going to be troublemakers, they don't want your kids hanging out with my children, and that was really difficult on most. There was a lot of families here, Tammy and Allison and the Shearers and stuff, that accepted us and knew we were a family, and we were actually more of, we weren't that broken family. We were the broken family before that person that was all darkness left, that it really filled, after he left, our house filled with light. So that's, I'm sure there's
That's
similar
great.
things with
That's
the
great.
ladies.
Thank you. Those are very insightful. Erica.
For me, because I grew up in a very religious household and grew up in the church, went to a very strict church growing up, I think the biggest misconception was that divorce is a sin that you're punished for by God. And I saw very little compassion from the people that I grew up with that I thought were my friends, because they were of the opinion that I was receiving the consequences for my sin. And it was really hard for me because I didn't know how to weigh my choice to leave an unsafe marriage and sin, and I felt like the people that needed to be there for me weren't. They also, I heard things like gossip about me and things that they would say that my life wouldn't be blessed if I left him, that if I married again, I'd be an adulteress. So I'm an adulteress to a lot of my family members now because I married the love of my life, who treats me well. It's hard for me to think that people think that way of me, but RiverTree has given me strength to see God differently. I think the other thing is that a lot of people, I get this question a lot, they're like, well, you're struggling financially, don't you get child support? I hear it all the time. And people think that you leave your husband and everything is nice because you get free money, that you don't have to work for. And it's kind of ridiculous because most people their lives completely changed. We went from living in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs to staying with friends on their couches, moving every 3-4 weeks. And the belongings we had fit into 3 laundry baskets. That's all we had. I had no money, and I was lucky to get $50 here and there. And it takes well over a year for the courts to do anything about back child support. So it's poverty pretty much right away.
Yeah, that's very helpful, right? You can see how many people don't know that. I have a good friend here who knows about such things more than I do, and he is fond of saying that the fastest route into poverty for a woman in America is divorce. And I know that Erica and Denise have had to live that.
I have 2 sons, 11 and 13, and I get less than $5,000 a year in child support for both of them, not together, just 4,000 something. And I don't know, with 2 growing boys, I think they eat that in like 2 months.
Right. Yeah, that's good. You can hear, right, why I would compare this group of people today to the widows and orphans back then. There is the complete loss of friends and family sometimes. There's not knowing how you're going to care for yourself financially, how you're going to take care of your basic needs oftentimes. You hear that. All of them raise something that it's worth you considering, which is, so what if you down the road, or we down the road as a church, are trying to reach out to and care for a woman who is going through a divorce that you may not agree with? By the way, it's not really your place to make that moral choice, it's theirs, but just go along with my hypothetical scenario. And so you're looking from the outside in and you go, gosh, I really think they could make this work if they tried. So we're only going to help people who make decisions that we agree with. Okay, you might as well stop being a church then. Because I assure you that if we all got to know the moral choices that all of us were making, you wouldn't agree with 100% of what anybody in the room is doing, including me. So you agreeing with what has led up to the dissolution of a marriage is irrelevant to whether or not you will care for that person in their time of need. You see that? You need to. You need to. Their stories bear that out. Okay, ladies, one more. I would like you to tell us if we as a church we're going to continue down this road of being what God has already made us to be, which is a church that cares for and includes folk like you well. What might that look like? How do you think we might do that well? How did we do that well? Or if a small group of us rallied around a woman like you, how could they do that in a way that would be well received? What kind of things would you need, or could they do for you? Courtney, you want to start?
Well, I think RiverTree does a really good job of this based on my own experience. Like I said, when I first started attending, we were back in the, we were in the new building. And at that time, I sat like 2 rows in, way in the back left, really close to an exit, because I needed the freedom to run. And so I knew 2 people, probably for the first 2 years of my experience at RiverTree. Joan Brock was the very first person that I actually knew her name, and we sat both together in the back, and she smiled at me, but she gave me the freedom to not share. And I was an emotional wreck all the time, and so I needed that freedom to hide parts of my life, and she let me have that. And then she let me run out the door, and we actually were laughing about this at the women's retreat, because she's like, I totally felt the same way. Like, I was ready to run too. And so it was just the freedom of that. And then I knew the door greeter, whose name I couldn't remember until the women's retreat, and it was Ken. And he was always at the door smiling. And so for me, it was Ken's face at the door and Joan's face inside, and then I left. And that's all I could handle. And then I think it was Allison who was in prayerful consideration of me very early on, and she didn't know my name, and so she prayed for me as the girl in the red coat, because I always wore a red coat. And so she prayed for me before she even knew who I was, and that was just so amazing. And she eventually sought me out and called me and said, hey, we have this really great small group of women, and we want you to be a part of it. We think that you would be such a good fit with us. And so I was still scared to share my story, still scared to be vulnerable. But I had an invitation, and I felt like God was pulling me that way. So I said I would come, and I started attending small group with those women. And I think for me at that time, that was the perfect fit. Like, it had to be a small group of women, because I was so bitter and angry towards like young couples and young families that had what I had thought I would have at that point in my life, and I didn't. And so I carried so much anger with me. And so to be surrounded by women who loved me broken was exactly what I needed and what RiverTree did for me. And I think the other thing for me was that I needed a safe place. And Kevin, my husband, reminded me this morning, like, you'll be fine up there this morning because this is a safe place. And I think that it's so hard to get to that point when you trust people enough to share your story. And so thank you for being my safe place.
Thank you, Courtney. So what'd you hear? What do you need to remember as we seek to invite women like this into this safe place? You have to give them space sometimes. Let them take their time. They're not ready right away to share, right? You need to let them grieve. They have gone through it's true in all three of these ladies' cases, plus other ones who aren't up here, but are out there this morning. They have to be able to grieve. They've gone through a tremendous loss, like a death. You have to give them the space to grieve. Eventually, they will decide when it's time for them to let you in or let us in. They need a place. Courtney said it was her women's group, where she doesn't feel like it's all families and kids, because it's just a reminder of the life she wished she had. You see all that. It's crucial to get that. Denise.
I have to agree with Courtney. Coming up here and talking, since we've all been hurt, there's a trust issue. I'm sure Erica has that too. So trying to limit your details and things like that, it was really, and looking back at how our life was very difficult this week. A lot of stress, and but maybe a good thing, because I usually choose not to look back at things, and it doesn't seem real to me anymore. But what helped me a lot was I'm not one to go and ask for help. And when I started, I also, at the new building, sat in the second to back row usually. Must have been on the other side. And just sat there, but each week just having that desire to go back, that warm feeling, and opening my eyes more up to Jesus, to this place that talked to me and not down to me. And really, when Chris would do his hanging outs, I went one time, and it was at a park, and the times were mixed up, and he was walking in, and I was leaving with my kids, and I'm like, I think that's our pastor, but he was dressed, in summer clothes, and I went over and I introduced myself and said I just am newly separated, and he gave me his card, and he said, let's get together for coffee sometime. And I felt like he meant it, but it still took me a couple weeks to do that, to trust somebody. And I was really grateful to have especially a man, to trust, because I don't think, besides my dad, I never had another person like that. And also then it led me later into my small group, which was all families, and they treated me so much like a family unit, which was important, instead of just being, the lady and her kids. But knowing that I couldn't do some of the stuff, we'd go camping, and Jesse would make sure that we had a tent set up when we got there, knowing that I wouldn't do that. And the men in our group really went and didn't mind doing all the guy stuff with the boys, that taking them out on their bikes and doing these jumps, where me as a mom would be like, I don't want to even see it. So things like that, just having good men role models for the boys in the small group, that was really important. And for them to see that, hey, they're just like us. She's not just going out and trying to ditch her kids with me, things like that, that we had the same set in values, but there was just the dad removed. So, and just didn't want to be always singled out as a single or divorced person, and my group they always included us. Whereas if it was other groups of like friends or women, or it's not that they intentionally didn't include me, but they knew, she's at home with the kids, she won't want to go. So there was sometimes a lot of that with friends, where they just wouldn't bother to invite you, because they know, you won't get a sitter, or things like that. And that would hurt sometimes, because even if I had to say no, you still wanted to be kind of like asked. So, but in my small group, that was never an issue.
Very good. Thank you, Denise. I think that means, Jesse, you're on the hook to set up every single woman's tent, present and future.
He also set up our trampoline, too, by the way.
There you go. There it goes.
If you were to ask me to write a handbook on what to do for single moms, I would just kind of repeat everything that RiverTree did for me. I feel like they did it right, and it wasn't forced. It was from their hearts, and that was a big thing for me. As I said, when I walked in, I really did not trust people in church, and it was a huge thing for me to be able to let people into my life and not just tell surface things about myself, which I had done my whole life at church, but be myself, be real, and have people love me anyway, even though it probably wasn't always comfortable for them to hear those things. And PC also, I was told by Amy to go talk to him, and I was very scared about it because I felt like if I talked to him, then I would be outing myself as a sinner, and then I wouldn't be welcome. And it was the opposite, actually. Once I actually had the guts to talk to him and he started to counsel me, I really felt like I was started to heal spiritually, and just kind of understand my place in this life when my whole world was upside down. And that was huge for me. I think one of the biggest things that RiverTree did for me was meet my financial needs, and but it was more than that. But I mean, like Denise, I don't like to ask for help. I refuse to. And so almost every time they helped me, it was because of the people immersed in my life through RiverTree. They knew I was struggling, they saw it, and they asked for help for me because they knew. It wasn't something that I could come to the church and say, hey, my lights are being turned off, can you help me? It was through conversations with people that I trusted. They would find out those things, and they would help me, and they would find people to help me. And I needed that because I didn't have the strength to do it myself. And in the meantime, I think the biggest thing you can do as a church and as small groups is to give people, when you're helping them, to not make them feel like less of a person. And RiverTree really did that for me because I was encouraged to use my strengths and my gifts while I was going through this process. I was told by PC it was okay to volunteer with youth. And I was really shocked by that because so many churches don't let you do that while you're going through a divorce or obviously sinning. And I just felt like I could give something back to this community, and I wasn't just taking from it. So that helped me pride-wise in that way.
Very good. Very good. Key on the fact, right? And you can put yourself in their shoes to understand why. Women that we have helped or will help down the road aren't always going to ask for help. They need us to be the ones to invest in them enough to be aware, and then, as Erica said, take the initiative on their behalf for our church to begin to meet their needs. That's huge. Obviously, it took a whole lot of courage for these three ladies to come and be so open and vulnerable. Would you please thank them for doing this morning? Let me finish by saying you need to know where this comes from. This is not something that is my idea. This is not a creative idea for ministry that I myself have had. Actually, what it comes from is just through very careful observation of what God is already doing in our midst. And it's something that I see, and it's something that the elders and deacons on our steering team see. We see that you already do this, which means we want to be more and more intentional about doing this together. What's that going to look like? You know, if you're in a small group, we are asking all the small groups to actively together identify neighbors that they will be reaching out to and caring for. Let me go ahead and tell you right here that we would love for our groves to identify women like Erica, Denise, and Courtney. Over the course of the remainder of 2014, we're going to put together some simple guidelines for each of our groups about how to go about reaching women like you heard this morning. So I hope in 2 or 3 months, every one of our groves has a woman like this identified that they are beginning to reach out to. And here's maybe even the better news. I have been working all summer with a local ministry called Safe Haven Ministries, which reaches out to and cares for abused women. It's actually how I got to know Erica to start with. I am working with them on a pilot program where they are going to refer women that are in their care to local churches for long-term care and support. And we're going to be the first church in that program, which means beginning soon, sometime in the remainder of 2014, they are going to begin to say to me, we have an abused woman, likely going through divorce. Her entire world is upside down, like you heard this morning. Now, would your church rally around this woman, be her community, care for her, and help her find new life? And you as a person or our small groups here will have the chance to take on those people. That's what it looks like for us to love and to care for the widows and orphans of our day. I hope you're excited about living into this part of the DNA that you already have. Would you pause for a moment and let's pray together?